Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 14th annual Design for Drupal. My name is Patrick Corbett, and I'm going to turn on my video. I'm a volunteer here at d4d, along with Leslie Glynn, who will cover announcements in just a moment. For those of you who are new to Design for Drupal, welcome. This is an annual event devoted to Drupal design, UX, front-end development, as well as the business and processes of challenges facing Drupal teams. We are typically an in-person event held every summer in Boston, Massachusetts, but in its place, we've been holding monthly webinars on various Drupal and design front-end topics. We do, however, anticipate holding next year's event in person. I'm fairly confident in that this time, and we will keep you posted as plans come together for that. We are supported by a great team of volunteers here, including Catherine Carruthers handling our video and recordings, and Catherine Waldron, who manages our social media and mailings. I'm going to turn things over to Leslie for some announcements.
Thank you, Patrick, and welcome everybody to our 14th anniversary. As Patrick said, we really look forward to next year being back in person for our 15th anniversary. Today, we welcome Sharon Seed, keynoting on developing sustainable empathy systems. Patrick will introduce Sharon in a moment. I'm just going to go through some couple of community slides before we get going with the keynote. Right after Sharon's keynote, roughly around 1:30, we'll give everybody a chance to grab a coffee. There will be a contribution event for those that would like to stay. We're going to focus on the Project Browser Strategic Initiative that myself and Chris Wells from Redfin Solutions are co-leading. This is a big initiative for Drupal 11. So the intention of this is to make it easier for folks to browse and find projects to extend the functionality of their Drupal sites. So it's easy to spin up a Drupal site, but then figuring out what's available to add for different types of functionality. That's what the Project Browser is intended for. And we're building it with site builders and those new to Drupal in mind. So it's not meant for the experts, it's meant for the people who are newer to Drupal, trying to create a website with the functionality that they or their clients are looking for. So that'll be at 1:30. There is a bit.ly link to the right here where you can register separately. I have a separate Zoom. It's not a webinar, so that we can share it more easily. So it's bit.ly d4d 2022 for contribution, all lowercase. So that will be at roughly 1:30. Everyone is welcome. Absolutely no Drupal knowledge is required. And there's a sneak preview right there of what the Project Browser page will look like in Drupal 11. All right, so what are we going to do at the contribution event? Some really, really easy things. For instance, proposing updates to the information on the Drupal.org project pages. So if you're a designer, help us create logos for the projects or modules within Drupal. Propose short non-technical descriptions for each one of the modules. Again, no expertise really needed, just read what the module does and rewrite it in a less than 200 character non-technical description. Categories, another thing, you can just choose what categories different projects should be in so that folks can have an easier time searching for them. We can also have people just do user testing. You don't have to know anything about Drupal. Just hop on. I can show you what the issue queue is, and there's different things developers just worked on, or front-end engineers worked on, and we just need to test those. Or you can just provide feedback on what I just showed you on that preview page. Does it make sense to you? Are there things you don't understand? And then there's also coding for those of you who want to work on UX, front-end, or back-end issues. So that'll be this afternoon. Just a couple hours just to get you familiar, and you can continue contributing whenever you have free time. These are just some things that you can contribute to other than the Project Browser. There's some themes, there's an easy out-of-the-box initiative. These are all on the Drupal Slack channels. But again, everybody's welcome. Front-end, coding, theming, documentation, accessibility, whatever you like to work in, you can help us. In addition to today's keynote and contribution event, we have, in place of having an in-person event, we have a monthly webinar. It's typically held on a Wednesday, noon Eastern time. Once a month, we hold those. We do have one scheduled, I believe, in August on personalization. I didn't have the details yet, so I didn't create a slide, but we'll send out a notification as soon as we solidify that, and we have a Zoom link for you to register for. If you do have any ideas for speakers, again, they do not have to be, it doesn't have to be about Drupal, but just something of interest to the Design for Drupal audience, please send information to boston@designfordrupal.org, design4drupal.org, or send it to myself or Patrick, and we can schedule those webinars. And there are also recordings on our website, design4drupal.org. There are recordings from all of our previous webinars, so there's a lot of great information in there. So feel free to go to our website and browse those webinars, and they're all on YouTube. You can watch whichever ones are of interest to you. In terms of community events, DrupalCon North America, the biggest Drupal event in North America, was held in April. The recordings are on the YouTube channel, and I have a link down the bottom here. Same thing coming up in September, DrupalCon Prague in Czech Republic is happening. Right now, you can still register to attend that event, and I have the link at the bottom of this slide as well. So that's the big international event. Upcoming more local community events, July 8th and 9th is Drupal Camp Asheville. That's in North Carolina. That is in person. August 5th and 6th is Drupal Camp Colorado. That is both in person and virtual. So you can watch that online if you choose. Internationally, there's a Drupal Camping, Wolfsboro in Germany. That's in person if you want to go on a road trip, or if you're listening in from Germany. That's April 25th and to 28th. September 16th to 17th, there are two camps actually. There's the DDI camp, which is the Drupal Diversity and Inclusion Camp. That's an online again this year. And then in person is Drupal Camp Atlanta, same dates, September 16th and 17th. And locally to the Boston area, we have New England Drupal Camp, which is November 18th and 19th, and that will be in person in Providence, Rhode Island. So sign up for that as well. There is a community events page on Drupal.org. It's drupal.org/community/events. That lists the upcoming camps, some of which I just mentioned, but keep going to this page. It gives you the local meetups, which are more informal. It gives you the DrupalCons, Drupal camps, upcoming trainings, and contribution events like we're having today, calls for speakers, calls for content, and you can put in a proposed event, kind of like to say, I'm proposing it on this date, try not to put yours on the same date as another camp. So that's all on the community events page. That's very helpful and good source of information. And a lot of this is very low cost or free. The Drupal Code of Conduct. Obviously, one of our greatest strengths is our inclusiveness, making everybody feel welcome. That applies to both in person and any online activities that the community gets together for. So, we'll obviously the Drupal Code of Conduct is in effect for this event as all others. If you have any issues at all, please reach out to Patrick Corbett or myself, and we will address anything that comes up. We don't anticipate anything, but and there's a link to the Code of Conduct on the footer of our website. We need your help. This is a volunteer nonprofit organization that 4 or 5 of us are running right now. We'll need a lot more help next year. We go back in person. So if you want to help out with the website, coordinating the events, social media, speakers, anything, sponsors, please reach out. Boston@design4drupal.org. Thank you to our Gold Digital sponsor. Redfin Solutions once again has stepped up this year in 2022 to be the gold sponsor. So thank you. Thank you to our digital sponsors for this year. EPAM, Dev Collaborative, Atten Design Group, Elevated Third, Canopy Studios, Talking Drupal, 108 Degrees, and Pantheon. So thank you to all of our sponsors. They will be featured on all of the webinars as well as we go throughout the year and in the emails. So if you'd like to become a sponsor, there's still plenty of time. It's very inexpensive. Just go to the website and sign up to become a sponsor of the virtual series of events this year. Spread the word about today's event. Hashtag d4d, the number 4D Boston. So thanks for joining us for Design for Drupal Boston 2022. Please be kind. Remember to be kind to everybody you interact with. It makes for a better experience for everybody. And the Q&As, there's a Q&A tab. Please add your questions there, and Patrick will be asking the questions and Sharon will be answering those questions at the end of her presentation. And that is it. So let's get right into the keynote. Patrick is going to introduce Sharon. So thank you all for attending.
Thanks, Leslie. Our keynote speaker this year is Sharon Steed. Sharon is the founder of Communolog, an empathy consultancy with an emphasis on communication and inclusion in and out of the workspace. Sharon gives dozens of talks and runs workshops every year on topics including empathy, inclusion, and empowering insecurities. She has spoken at organizations including an event apart, TEDx, LinkedIn, and Microsoft. In her book, her O'Reilly book, Empathy at Work, Sharon discusses the various types of empathy and how each type impacts people's lives. Here in the Drupal community, we try to embrace diversity as much as possible, but sometimes it's hard to know how or where to start. So Sharon is here today to shed some light on how we can create a culture where everyone feels heard. Sharon, welcome to Design for Drupal, and take it away.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. And let us begin. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, perfect. I'm going to share my screen. This always takes me a few minutes. I'm sorry. Okay, so hi. I am Sharon. I am a keynote speaker and empathy consultant, and I'm also a person who stutters. And all of those things have been just incredibly impactful in all of the work that I do. But I'm going to begin with talking about the speaking and consulting, and then I will go a little bit more into my own personal story as a stutterer in a couple of minutes. So, oops, there we go. So like Patrick said, I am a keynote speaker. I've spoken at a lot of companies and conferences all over the world on improving communication, collaboration through engaging empathy behaviors. And ever since the pandemic hit, I have spent a lot of time talking about empathy as a way to build more inclusive cultures. And I have spoken at a lot of different kinds of companies and a lot of different industries. I have a couple of courses on LinkedIn. One is Communicating with Empathy, and the other one is called Driving Inclusion with Empathy. I also have a book that Patrick mentioned. It's called Empathy at Work. And so I'm here today to talk about creating more inclusive and diverse cultures, through implementing sustainable empathy systems. And so in order to, talk about that bigger goal, we have to begin with, first defining what empathy is. And so, according to the dictionary, like the very plain dictionary definition, empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. And I think that this definition is, like perfectly acceptable, but I don't think that it really describes or tells you like how to be truly empathetic. And that's because empathy as a noun is an idea. It is intangible. It doesn't, tell you the ways that you can, go out into the world and, be truly empathetic. And so, when I was, creating content for these talks and the courses and, all of the things that I do, I was trying to think of a way to teach people, one, what empathy is, and two, how to, be empathetic by comparing it to another, topic that is similar, and that, a lot of people can describe it, but not a lot of people can really explain it. And so I came up with this concept that is comparable to empathy, and that is the whole idea of just being in love. So if you think about just being in love, it's just this incredibly awesome, just overwhelmingly, positive feeling. You feel like you can do absolutely anything as a result of being with this person. You somehow have the time to create these incredibly long texts and to tell this person that they are just the most incredible amazing person that you have ever been around. You have to show people that you are so in love by doing incredibly regrettable but also iconic things where you like dress in very similar sort of outfits that are going to live online in infamy. But as time goes on, as you really get to know this person, those like new being in love feelings kind of subside, and you get into this routine, and you get more comfortable, and you become more of who you are going to be in this long-term partnership, right? And so in the beginning, it's just this incredible, overwhelming, I'm so in love and I'm so happy. And then eventually it turns into a job. You have to work incredibly hard at, being in a loving, committed partnership. And so being, in love is exciting. It's also this sort of, intangible concept of, love, as a noun is just that. It's a concept. It's an idea. It doesn't have any meaning until you give it meaning. Love as a verb, however, is a choice. And it's a choice that you have to make every single day. It's also a choice that's between you and this person that you are in, this loving relationship with. And so if we bring this back to empathy, as a noun, it is an idea. It is a great idea, but it is still, completely intangible until you give that idea meaning. And that's why empathy as a verb is a choice. And it's a choice that, you are going to have to make every day. And that choice is going to look a little bit different for each and every person that, you have in your circle, especially in your professional circle. And so empathy, again, is an individual choice. And it's also how you define it. Each and every person is going to need something a little bit different from you in order to feel like you are attempting to really empathize with them. And you are going to need something very specific in order to know that people are really trying to empathize with you. And so, I want to shift here to talk a little bit about culture, because when it comes to, creating sustainable empathy systems, we are talking about putting some processes in place that are going to sustain a culture that can sustain inclusion and diversity. And you do those things through engaging empathy. And so, let's define culture. Culture is the shared values, attitudes, standards, and beliefs that characterize an organization and define its nature. And so when I see this definition, I see two parts here. The first is the shared values, attitudes, standards, and beliefs. Now, I see these four words, these four concepts, and I feel like they're all circling around the same points of culture being the experience that people have when they are interacting with you, your company, or your products. And so the other, part of this definition is those last three words that define its nature. Culture defines you. that it doesn't define you in the way that you think. You know, the result of, an inclusive culture have been documented, time and time and time again. And so, all of these things are things that I'm sure that from, just being involved in a workplace, right? People are going to be more engaged. They're going to be more productive. They're going to be a lot more motivated. And they're going to be 3.5 times more likely to contribute to their fullest potential, right? And so if you think about, all of these facts, they're all incredibly, like big, impactful results of, an inclusive culture. And so, these, like big things are going to really define your culture. However, it's the little things that are going to create your culture. And so, what do I mean by that? Well, if you think about, all of these results, all of these things are just small, everyday behaviors that people are doing to either improve a culture or to deteriorate it. And so the results are the big things, but the everyday behaviors, are going to be the small things like that are going to really create this culture, this, inclusive culture that you desire. And so in order to, create this, inclusive culture, then you have to focus on those small, everyday moments that matter, right? Employees, your teammates, your coworkers, your direct reports, these are all people and they have feelings. They have goals. They have motivating forces behind them that kind of, keeps them going. And so if you can create impactful and positive moments that matter, then your culture is going to slowly develop into a much more inclusive one, over time. So at the beginning of this talk, I told you that I was a person who stutters. And as you can tell, I'm a person who stutters. And so stuttering has been a big part of the reason, why I got into this work in the first place. So this is me. I'm around 3 years old here. I know I'm painfully adorable. But this is around the time that I, began to show signs of having a speech impediment. But my parents weren't, all that concerned about it because, a lot of kids who are around this age, show some sign of stuttering, but almost all of them just outgrow it by the time, they hit, 5 years old or 6 years old. Well, I did not outgrow it, and it continued to be just a very big part of my experience as I went throughout life. And so I developed these like communications neuroses where, I would only talk if I knew that I could be 100% fluent, right? And so I would only, say the words and the sounds that, I knew I could easily get out of my mouth. I also just became an incredibly anxious person. I had a lot of like social anxiety. And so, after, years of, constantly just being in my own, head about speaking and communication, I kind of came to this point where I was so intimidated by stuttering that I was, just avoiding all situations where, I was going to have to talk to people, right? And so I'm, in my 20s and I'm trying to get my career, off the ground, but I'm afraid to like go on, job interviews, and I'm afraid to go to networking events because of my speech and impediment. I thought that people would think that I was, like dumb or that I was incompetent, right? I had it in my, head that everybody was constantly judging me because of how I was speaking. And what was, actually going on was I was the only one who was really judging myself, incredibly harshly, while everybody else was just trying to, hear what I had to say. And so, again, I sort of came to this point in my life where like I knew that I was going to have to overcome this fear if I ever wanted to really, live the kind of life that I knew that I was capable of. And so that's when I decided to pursue public speaking. And that, quickly sort of turned into, me talking about engaging empathy behaviors. Now, I'm going to connect a couple of dots here because I know that that is like, how did you go from a person who was terrified of talking to a person who is now paid to talk to people about engaging empathy? Well, in the beginning, I was talking about, just being a person who stutters. And I was talking about, patience in a fast-paced world. I was talking about, communicating with confidence and all of those things. But what I was, touching on in every single talk was this, concept of, having empathy for people when it's really challenging to, like do that. I think that, us as people, we're not, born to really easily empathize with those around us. we are, like born to really be protectionists of our, safety and our well-being. And so as I was, exposing, these very, personal and vulnerable, parts of my self, I was able to really, like touch a chord with a lot of people around this topic of, one, having empathy for those around you, and, two, other people, having, more empathy for, you and the very, personal and anxiety inducing, like experiences that, we can have when we are, trying to be more vulnerable as a way to, connect with other people. And so, like over the years, as I was talking a lot more about, like engaging empathy, this, concept of these, key empathy behaviors, these, things that you like had to do in order to really, turn empathy from this very intangible concept into, a skill, they began to form for me, right? And so in order for empathy to, be a skill, we have to put some sort of system behind it as a way to, guide people to, better engage empathy in a way that's going to make inclusion and diversity just more prevalent and sustainable in, every type of company. And so, like that's when I came up with these, key empathy behaviors, and these are a result of, years of, spending time with, people at companies and conferences, and really, like talking to people and seeing, the, kinds of behaviors that they were engaging in that were really beneficial to creating a more empathetic and inclusive culture. And those behaviors that were, like taking empathy and inclusion away. And so, these key empathy behaviors, or, the KEBs, are the core components that are going to be necessary in order to engage in empathy actions in communication and beyond. They are going to be, you as an individual, you as a team, and you as an organization, your specific process to really operationalize empathy and to create a more sustainable empathy system. And it's going to be the foundation of, your personal approach to empathetic communication. And now you see that I talk quite a bit about communicating with empathy and empathetic communication. Well, I'm a person who believes that the best way to show that you are, attempting to, like do anything is through the way that you communicate, right? Either verbally or non-verbally, or both simultaneously. And so these key empathy behaviors are really going to be more communication focused. So these behaviors are going to fall under, three main categories, and that's patience, perspective, and connection. Excuse me. So let's talk about patience for a couple of minutes here. So what are the benefits of patience? Well, if you are patient and you are viewing patience as a behavior, you are also going to be building your resilience muscle. You are also going to be able to manage stress more effectively in every possible area of your life, but especially at work. And then you are going to have a lot more control over the way that you think. And this last one is incredibly important, because the way that you think about situations and people is going to deeply impact how you like deal with situations and these people specifically, and that's going to come across in the way you communicate with them. So more benefits of patience here, you are going to have a much better understanding of your actual situation, right? And here's a couple of stats here. 3/4 of employees consider their direct line managers the worst part of their jobs. But like this isn't surprising, right? Like people don't leave or go to companies. They leave or go to managers, right? And so these managers are going to be the most important culture carriers, and so they also have to really embrace being more patient in order to both attract and keep the top talent. And that is collected in this next statistic, in that 65% would like take a pay cut if they could replace their boss with someone else. And so if you are like a patient manager, you are going to be a more attentive manager, and then you are going to be able to make a lot more informed decisions, right? And this is incredibly important when you as either a manager or a leader are trying to create a more inclusive culture and a more sustainable empathy system on your teams. If you don't know how those people on your teams are actually feeling on a day-to-day basis, then how can you make the necessary changes required in order to keep the top talent on your team? right? In order to be more informed, you need to be more patient. So, how do you be patient, right? How do you turn patience into a behavior? Well, the crux of this is just to be 100% present, be focused on, these people in front of you. Every interaction is incredibly important. So you want to give that all of your attention. And that means that, you're probably just going to have to practice stopping. And by that, I mean, turning off your alerts, or, putting your phone face down and just paying attention, or just giving all of your attention to, this person who is in front of you. And then, always remember the why, right? It's so easy to be in these conversations, and you can kind of hit into the weeds of, like some talk that you're having, and you forget the why of the conversation, right? And that can get you, off track, one. And two, it's also going to encourage you to maybe, have your mind wander a bit, right? And if you keep the goal of your current conversation at the front of mind, it's going to be a lot, easier to maintain the patience that, you need in order to continue to, engage in empathy. So the next one is perspective. And perspective is the particular way of viewing things that depends on one's, own experiences and personality. It's also the ability to consider things in relation to one another accurately and fairly. And, I have these two things underlined because we as people have a very hard time being either accurate and or fair. It's very, very difficult. And it's because we only know our own perspective, right? And so, that is kind of like the basis of, like being biased. And, overall, being biased, it just, goes back to, you only know what you can see and what you, have experienced, right? And so it doesn't always have to be, a bad thing. The problem is that we, often use those biases in a more weaponized capacity where we, like take them, and that's just the, only way that we are going to view a certain kind of person, right? So bias, again, is a natural tendency to, judge either, towards, against someone or something. It is often learned, and it is dependent on, just our own personal experiences and, our own viewpoints. And so, like, that could be our socio economic status, our race, ethnicity, etc. And so, like these two things kind of, go back to perspective, right? When you are, trying to get perspective, you are trying to get past those biases, like both the positive biases and the negative biases, right? And so, how do you do that? Well, you are trying to, cultivate more solid relationships through really listening. You are going to improve the feedback loop in order to get, better context, right? And so like those two things together, they result in more transparency in, all conversations and all relationships. That transparency is going to lead to, like better understanding. And the more you understand another person, the more you are going to trust this person, and their opinions as well as their experiences. So, perspective, it is the root of, really understanding other people. So, how do you do that, right? Well, the first thing that you are going to do, and I talk about this with my consulting clients, and I also, like do an activity in all of the workshops I conduct around this first bullet point, because it is so incredibly important. You don't know everything. I know that you think you do. I know that I think I do, but you don't. You don't know everything that's going on in another person's life, right? And so you don't know why that a person is behaving in a particular way, right? It might not be about you or your team or about anything that's going on, at work, right? Like people could be behaving in certain ways because of a thing that's going on in their like personal lives. And we are people, and we bring our entire selves to work for better or for worse. And so the best thing that you can do in order to have perspective is to one, remind yourself that again, you do not know everything. And so as a result of that, you don't know why a person is behaving in the way that they are behaving. The other thing that you can do when you are, trying to, have more perspective is to really think before you speak. We don't always hear what people are saying to us. We hear, our opinion of what people are saying to us. And so it's always really important to take a moment to really, embrace what this, other person has said to you. And to do that, simply just repeat what they have said, back to them. And when you do this, it really is going to minimize, like biases, because then you are gonna, like one, have clarity, and two, you are going to, not, like just hear what your opinion is of what they have just said. And so the, final, key empathy behavior here is connection. And I like to close out, all of my talks with like this, because connection, is going to be, why we are, communicating with each other, in the first place, right? When we are, like having conversations, our entire goal is to really, share, ideas and create, cool things, and to, like empower, either other people or or our teams to really, like move forward and to, grow and evolve in a, like positive and productive way, right? And so every interaction is going to be its own entity. I think that a lot of the times we put a lot of stock on the relationship that we already have in place with a person, right? And so either we, have a very positive, easygoing relationship, or we have a very disconnected and challenging rapport. We bring those feelings into every conversation that we, have with, this person. And that isn't always going to be the most beneficial way to, approach conversations. Every time you talk, to a person, you are creating, another facet of your relationship with, this person. And so it's, always important to really speak with intention first, and then, for impact second, as a way to create a positive working relationship, as you go forward. And that's why, I say here that, connection is the beginning. Every time that you talk to a person is an evolution of the relationship that you currently have. And so you always, are going to want to build on what you have before, or create, a better foundation than what you left off on. So again, connection is, your opportunity to really continue to, build and grow and evolve in this relationship that, you are experiencing with your teammates. So that is all that I have for you today. Do you have any questions? I don't know if I included a Q&A slide. I did not. Okay. Did you have any questions? I would love to, answer any questions that you have about, empathy or communication or all of the above.
Thank you, Sharon. That was wonderful. And people do have questions. They'll start coming in shortly, and they can post them to the Q&A. While they're doing that, I have just some questions for you too. One thing that really stood out for me was your statement about big things define culture and little things create culture. And I think that is the one thing that I personally was looking for out of your talk was, how, doing big things is great. Like we can define these things and say that we're supporting inclusivity and empathy in the workplace or in our personal lives, but what are the little things that we need to do to actually create that? So with patience, perspective, and connection, those are really useful tools to kind of start thinking about. My question is, what's an example of, and I'm going to use workplace as an example just because that's where my head's at, but like what's the difference between a workplace that's really embraced that defining and creating that culture and a workplace that hasn't or is, needs to work on that? Like what kinds of things can we look at in our own companies to sort of identify like whether maybe some work is needed or not?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that it's really important to remember that, you know, include diversity is a result of inclusion. And so if you're having a hard time of keeping people of color or, women or LGBTQ, IA plus people on your team, then that's like the, number one red flag of like, okay, there is a problem and, we need to fix it there. And then, like there are like other things that, aren't as big. If there are a couple of people who, do all of the talking when you are in meetings, if there are a couple of people who, don't ever talk when you are in meetings, if there are a couple of people who don't ever attempt to go up for promotions, if there are a couple of people who are only going up for promotions, you always want to look at what, the typical experience is for a person on your team. And if the typical experience is that they, are not comfortable talking, or if they are way too comfortable talking, or if they are like not good at sort of forming more like comfortable working relationships, then these are points to begin to discern why that is.
Thank you. The other thing that stood out to me was the cats reenacting the Titanic scene. I thought that was very
Oh,
impactful.
that's always a hit. It's like, yes, that's what love is. It
Yeah.
doesn't, I mean, it's, just kind of like, what is that? But it's also like, that's exactly what it is.
It's always hard with these virtual things. You can never hear people laughing or clapping, and I always like regret that. But hopefully soon we can.
Oh, it's fine. I
Um,
mean, like after a couple of years of doing this, I've just gotten really like comfortable with, just me laughing at my own jokes. Like it's fine. They're laughing at home, I'm sure.
we have one question, and Leslie, did you want to add something?
I just want to say I liked your simple graphic of the stop sign because I'm a person that goes 1,000 miles a minute,
It's so
and
hard.
just stopping, that was very impactful. So thank you for that.
Oh, of course.
So we've got a question. Are there individual or group exercises that you recommend to help build empathy?
Yeah, so I conduct some workshops, and so I kind of have, like two different kinds of workshops. One of them is where we, like have just more discussions based on, like people's experiences, right? And so, like in my, talks, like I talk about, my own, like personal experiences and like how that, comes back to, how, you can, like engage empathy. And so in my workshops, sort of, guide people through, doing the same thing that, I'm doing themselves. And so, I always like to use, people's, personal experiences to, teach their teammates, like, oh, like this is a person who has, gone through, like other things that, I never considered, right? And so, yeah, so like that's, one way is to just, have a conversation about like either communication or, inclusion, diversity, whatever it is, and then have, all the people on your team talk about, their different experiences, either communicating in times of, stress, or, like being the only, like on their team or, in their company, or, feeling like they were not included when they thought that they were going into a situation where inclusion was championed, right? I mean, I feel that the best way to teach people on your team how to, have, like just more empathy is to, have these, guided discussions that are going to give the other people on those teams perspective. And then the other way is to really, sit down and just define, what empathy is, as a team, and then as an organization. A lot of, these companies, they, who have, core values, and empathy is a ton of times a, core value. The problem is that they don't define it, one, or two, describe it, or three, like put down the behaviors that go back to, creating this, empathic culture. And so, companies and teams and managers, like they, are going to have to, go through that exercise in order to really teach their teams and teach their companies, here's how we are going to approach and engage empathy.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's a very intentional practice.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That isn't always easy. Like you said, a lot of companies have that in their mission, vision, or values, but what does it mean
Yeah, but I
to
mean, it's
them?
just really hard to sort of define it, right? I mean, like it's like saying that like I love love. It's like, well, what does that mean to you? So yeah, defining it is tricky, but it's really, really important if you are trying to create a culture of empathy organization wide.
That's great. I have a couple questions. One is, how do we deal with people in the team that have different kinds of prejudices, either LGBT, women, people of color? Do you think it's possible to change that mentality?
The only way that you are, like going to rock the boat is if you have open lines of communication, right? Like So I try very hard to not, live in an echo chamber, right? And so, like, even on my socials, I follow a couple of people that have a completely opposite, perspective on a lot of different things than I do. And I follow them because they, like, talk about, their beliefs in a way that I can, at least, understand. I don't, agree with it, but they are respectful and they, are willing to, have a conversation with a person who is, on the opposite end of the spectrum than, them. And so I think it's really, or no, it's proven to be incredibly important to have conversations with people that are very different from you. And if you don't think that you can have a really respectful conversation, then you're going to have to bring in, a third party and sort of, have them be your guide. Um, the most creative teams, the most like innovative companies have more transparency, right? And so people are not going to feel comfortable if they can't be themselves, right? But they have to be themselves in a more respectful way. And the only, way that that's going to happen is if we have conversations about our, our biases and our prejudices, and we, like, talk about where those things came from and, why they could be incorrect, right? In order to change people's mind, you have to expose them to something that they, haven't been exposed to before. Yeah, so I mean, it's all about having conversations. It's really, really difficult. It's hard to talk to a person that you just feel like, I don't understand where you are coming from. But as long as there's, like a baseline of respect there, then these are conversations that are really important to continuing to connect and grow and evolve as a team.
There was a second part to that question, but I think you covered it. The person who asked that, if you want to know more, just post it in the Q&A section. The next question, and I know I'm respectful of people's time and your time, Sharon. It's 1:15, but I'll try to do these next two questions and we can wrap it up. Have you found new ways to create an environment of empathy while people are working in predominantly online or hybrid workspaces?
Oh yeah, this is a hot topic right now, and I've talked to a ton of clients about this, and the best way to do this is to create in-office experiences online, right? And so, like, occasionally would have like a couple of minute conversation with a person that you would see like in the bathroom or in the hallway, right? And so, just have time on your calendar, or like seek out time, with other people where you can just have, like a 5 minute catch up, like, hey, like, how's life, like, how's work, like, how's this project, right? It's very easy to, just not do any of those things because we get really comfortable in our homes, and it's like, I have all of this time now where, like, I only want to work and I want to be done with it. But, if you want to continue to really connect with, those on your team, then you are going to have to kind of go out of your way to create these either, in-office interactions or, like conference interactions, right? Like the hallway track, like that's a really, really important part of the experience. And you're not going to be able to have that, same exact experience, but like, those are the times when you're, like building and reinforcing solid relationships. And so, like put like, 20 minutes, like a couple of times a day for your, like in office, like interactions, you know what I'm saying? And then, just have people say like, hey, like, I just wanted to have coffee with you for 10 minutes, like, let's talk.
Next question, I think this will be our last one. Focusing on issues like empathy are not often considered the essentials of work. Grouped into an area that's deemed a soft skill, have you ever ensured that organization leaders join you in championing building empathic cultures, not only defining it in values of the company, but embodying it in their actions?
Yeah, like that's kind of been, yeah, so I began, talking about this back in 2014, and it was a totally different time then, right? Like there wasn't a ton of people out there who were, having these kinds of conversations. And so I was, I'm not going to say that I was, like introducing like a brand new concept, because it is obviously not. But the world has changed a lot over the past like 8 years or whatever it's been. And so now I think people, companies, leaders can tell that like this is a really important thing, but they don't know, how to do it. And so like that's where, like people like me come in. And there are a bunch of others out there who have created programming around like empathy being a skill, right? It's like communication. It's not a quote unquote hard skill, like, but it is a required one that you are always, in every aspect of your career, from the beginning of it to the very end of it, you are going to need in order to get anything done, right? And so a lot more companies are beginning to sort of come to that path when it comes to, engaging empathy. I'm a person who believes that, in order to create an inclusive culture, one, and two, to be a better communicator, you need to have empathy as the foundation. And so all of the things that I do that turn it, into a behavior, have to do with attaching it to, inclusion and to communication. And so yeah, I have had some success in sort of, changing people's minds. It is, like a longer term process, right? I've created programming. I know a ton of consultants who are doing the same, kinds of work, and like they too, have created programming where you are, um, attaching behaviors to these concepts. And I do think that this sort of idea of empathy as a skill is going to be around for a long time, especially because we are in a more hybrid workforce. And I don't think that that's going to change either.
Yeah, I agree. I just want to let you know I've got a lot of thank yous and great talk and a lot of messages coming through. So I just want to
Great.
share those with you, applauding you for your time and sharing your background and your journey. We're really appreciative. Thank you.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sharon, for taking the time to join us. It was excellent talk.
Thank you.
All right, and I'm going to share my screen one more minute.